She thought it was just a cheap, broken-down warehouse, one more gamble to keep her mechanic shop alive. But hidden beneath the floorboards, behind a rusted steel panel no one had touched in decades, was a sealed bunker that hadn't seen daylight since the Cold War. What she uncovered inside would unravel a buried family secret, a forgotten invention, and a second chance to finish the work someone died protecting. Before we dive in, tell us where in the world you're watching from. We read every single one. And if you love stories about legacy, grit, and the quiet power of redemption, hit that subscribe button. Because tomorrow's story might just change how you see everything. The key didn't quite fit. Mae Alvarez jiggled it, twisted harder, and finally heard the stubborn click of the old lock giving up. She pushed the warped metal door open with her shoulder, and it groaned in protest as it swung inward. Dust swirled in the slanting afternoon sun like it had been waiting for this exact moment to exhale. The warehouse stood hollow and echoing, a long-forgotten relic on the edge of town, just past the train tracks where no one bothered to look anymore. Mae stepped inside, the crunch of debris under her boots the only sound, and for a long breath, she didn't move. She just looked around at what $8,000 and a mountain of optimism had bought her. The ceiling panels sagged. Rust traced every steel beam like veins. Paint peeled from the cinder block walls in soft curls, and an old oil drum sat collapsed in the corner, as if even it had given up hope. It was a wreck, but Mae had seen worse. Her own hands bore the scars of rebuilds no one else had dared to touch. And she didn't need perfect. She just needed possible. She turned in a slow circle, trying to picture it not as it was, but as it could be. Her current garage, the one her father had left behind before the cancer came, was too small for the restoration job she'd started taking on. This warehouse was a chance, a rough, rusted chance to expand, to dream a little bigger than survival, and it was all hers. She heard the familiar scrape of sneakers outside and turned to see her younger brother Nico ducking under the doorframe, a pack of bottled water in one arm, his phone lighting the shadows in his other. "You sure this place isn't haunted?" he called, half joking, half hoping it was. Mae cracked a smile. "If it is, maybe the ghost can help with drywall." Nico's laugh echoed off the walls, light and easy. He was 19, always restless, always 2 steps from doing something reckless. But since dropping out of community college, he'd stuck close. Too close sometimes. Still, she liked having him around. They didn't talk about their dad much anymore. But working side by side, that was their way. They moved slowly through the space, mapping it out in their heads. Mae trailed her fingers along the wall, imagining tool racks, an engine hoist, a paint booth tucked into the far corner. She was halfway across the floor when she felt it a subtle give under her boot. She froze, stepped back, then forward again. Hollow. Concrete shouldn't echo. She knelt down, brushing away dust, her fingers tracing the edges of a steel plate recessed into the floor. No markings, no hinges, just metal, sealed tight and waiting. "Nico," she called softly, her voice suddenly hushed by something she couldn't name. "Come look at this." He knelt beside her. "That's supposed to be there?" Mae shook her head, heart thudding now. "No, and I don't think anyone knows it is." They stared at the hidden panel in silence, unaware that nothing in their lives would be the same once they opened it. The sun had dipped below the train yard by the time Mae and Nico managed to pry the steel panel loose. It wasn't easy. Rust had fused the edges to the surrounding floor, and whatever lay beneath had been sealed for decades, maybe longer. They used a crowbar and brute determination, each groan of metal peeling back more mystery. Finally, with a sharp snap, the corner gave way, and a thick gust of stale metallic air rushed up to meet them. Mae recoiled slightly, instinct taking over the smell of something too old, too closed off from the world. Nico held the flashlight above the opening, its beam slicing through the dark. A narrow shaft descended below them, lined with corroded steel, and a ladder that vanished into the shadows. "This doesn't look like a basement," he murmured. Mae nodded slowly. "It's not. They didn't go down that night. Not yet." The air had an eerie weight to it, like it hadn't been disturbed since a time when secrets were buried as deeply as they were dangerous. Mae sealed the panel temporarily and marked it with yellow tape before locking up for the night. But her mind didn't leave the warehouse. It spun and buzzed with every creak, every echo, every unanswered question. The next morning, she returned early, alone. The warehouse looked different now, not just forgotten, but hiding something. She walked the perimeter again, noticing things she hadn't before. Old rivets in the wall that didn't match. Faded stenciling on a metal door frame that read, Southwest Armory Company, in barely legible paint. A place like this didn't just go dark overnight. She called in a favor to the local records office, but the woman on the line said there were no permits, no architectural blueprints, and no history tied to that property after 1973. Before that, mostly military leases, she said vaguely. Steel contracts, maybe. Records get fuzzy back then. Mae hung up with more questions than answers. She glanced at the floor panel again. Still sealed. Still waiting. Nico showed up an hour later with his climbing gloves and a harness. "If you're not going, I am," he said casually, trying not to sound like he was daring her. Mae gave him a look but couldn't argue. She knew neither of them would sleep again until they saw what was below. They pulled the panel completely off this time and secured rope lighting to the upper frame. Mae descended first. The ladder groaned under her weight, each rung sticky with grime. Her breath echoed in the shaft. After what felt like 20 feet, her boots hit solid ground. She stepped aside and called up to Nico. "It's safe." The room was pitch black until Nico's flashlight followed. The light swept over walls of riveted steel, rusted lockers, and old control panels covered in dials and cracked gauges. This wasn't a cellar. It was a bunker. Mae's breath caught. What the hell is this place? And somewhere in the dark, something clicked. The sound was soft. A click, barely audible over the drip of condensation and the nervous rustle of their breath. But Mae heard it. She spun toward the far end of the bunker, flashlight trembling slightly in her grip. Nico stood beside her, his eyes wide, and trying to hide the fact that he'd flinched too. "What was that?" he asked, voice lower now. Mae didn't answer right away. The beam of her light danced across rusted shelves, a dusty folding cot, a stack of water-damaged ration boxes labeled in old military script. Then it landed on something odd, a panel on the far wall, separate from the others. Cleaner, less corroded. The kind of clean that only happens when something's been touched more recently than the rest. She approached slowly. Dust shifted under her boots. Her fingertips brushed over the panel's edges, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then she felt it a ridge. Her nail slipped into a groove that ran along the side. She pressed, and with a slight hiss, the panel released, swinging outward with a mechanical thunk. Behind it, a recessed compartment. Inside sat a battered leather notebook, a box of tarnished keys, and a small metal tag hanging from a hook. Mae plucked the tag free. It was stamped with a name, Sergeant Elias Mercado. Her heart stuttered. Nico stepped beside her, looking down at the nameplate. "Wait, Mercado? Like Mom's maiden name?" Mae nodded slowly, her voice a whisper. It was her father's name. There was a long silence. They didn't know much about their grandfather. He'd vanished long before either of them were born. Their mom never spoke of him, and whenever Mae had asked, the answer was always the same. He left. That's all. But now, here they were, standing in an underground bunker, his name staring back at them from behind a secret panel. Mae picked up the notebook carefully. The cover crackled as she opened it. The first page was dated the 17th of August, 1973. The handwriting was neat, military precise. The first line read, "To whoever finds this if you're reading, then the lie has finally failed." She closed the journal again, pulse pounding. Her voice was unsteady. "This was his. You think this whole place belonged to him?" Nico asked. "I don't think," Mae replied. "I know." There was something sacred in the air now, like the bunker had shifted from a curiosity to a tomb, not of a body but of truth, of something buried too long beneath silence. They explored a little deeper. The room curved to the left, revealing an old radio transmitter mounted on a desk, dust-covered buttons, a broken headset, a half-shredded photograph, taped to the wall, a young soldier beside a prototype engine, smiling. Mae stared at the photo. Her hands felt numb. This wasn't just history. It was family. And somewhere, in the shadows of cold steel and forgotten echoes, the story of a man who disappeared was finally beginning to rise. The silence inside the bunker felt different now. Not just quiet, but intentional, like the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for someone to finally listen. Mae stood beneath the curved ceiling, her flashlight casting long, uncertain shadows along the riveted steel. She moved carefully, tracing her beam across the room. The farther she walked, the more the space unfolded, narrow corridors, branching into small rooms, all empty, except for dust, rust, and ghosts she couldn't name. Nico stayed close, his steps softer than usual. He kept glancing back toward the ladder like it might disappear. Mae didn't blame him. There was something unsettling about the air down here, heavy with time. But there was something else, too. Something electric, like discovery humming in her bones. They reached a second chamber, a makeshift control room. On one side stood a desk cluttered with yellowing papers, circuit diagrams, and hand-drawn schematics. Some were curled with age, others pinned to the wall with thumbtacks so old they'd rusted through. Mae leaned over the desk, brushing off the surface. One of the papers had a seal. U.S. Department of Defense. Internal Prototype Lab. Nico let out a low whistle. You're telling me Grandpa was building, what, weapons? Mae shook her head. Not weapons. Look at this. She held up a diagram, a cutaway of what looked like an engine, but not like anything she'd ever seen. The structure was rounded, almost elegant. Instead of fuel intake and combustion chambers, it had something labeled resonant containment housing. She didn't know what that meant. Not yet. But she could tell one thing for sure. It wasn't built for destruction. It was built for something else. Something cleaner. Something impossible. On the floor beneath the desk sat a steel crate. Mae opened it slowly. Inside was a military-grade tool set, still neatly arranged. In the center was a sealed envelope, yellowed at the edges. Her name was written across it in shaky pen. Mae froze. It didn't make sense. She hadn't been born when this was written. The handwriting matched the notebook, matched the photo notes. Her grandfather, a man she'd never met, had somehow left her a message. She slid the envelope into her jacket pocket without opening it. Not yet. Behind her, Nico tapped a control switch on the wall. A line of overhead lights flickered once, and then came to life. The bunker filled with dim, amber light. It revealed everything all at once. The depth of the room, the unfinished equipment, the stacked metal trunks, and in the center, a strange-looking device half-assembled on a platform. It looked like an engine, but not for a car, or a plane, for something else. Mae took a slow step forward. Her voice cracked in the quiet. He was building this in secret, she said, and they buried it with him. Nico didn't speak. He just stared at the engine, then at his sister. Whatever this place was, it wasn't just forgotten. It was erased. Mae didn't open the envelope right away. She carried it with her for days, tucked in the inside pocket of her jacket like a secret too sacred to rush. Each night after work, she'd sit at the edge of her bed, fingertips resting on the flap, her thumb brushing across her name. And each time, she stopped herself. Not out of fear, not exactly, but because once she read it, there'd be no going back. Whatever it contained would shape everything that came next. So she waited. Instead, she began reading the journal, page by fragile page. The first few entries were technical testing notes, diagrams, system failures. But the tone shifted quickly. Her grandfather's words grew less clinical, more confessional. Like he was writing not for the military, not even for himself, but for someone in the future who might try to understand why a man would bury his own legacy. They told us this was about national security, that we were building a backup power system in case of blackout scenarios. But when they started talking about military extraction vehicles and deployment payloads, I knew. They wanted to turn energy into weaponry, and I couldn't be part of it anymore. Mae sat on the floor of the warehouse, the journal open across her knees. The bunker had become her second home. Now she and Nico spent hours every day cataloging what they found. The engine on the platform, it turned out, wasn't complete. Parts were missing, but the framework was there. Curved metal housings, high-density composite coils, cooling systems unlike anything Mae had ever seen. She flipped to a later page in the journal. I told them I was done, that I wouldn't finish the prototype. I should have known what that meant. The next morning, I was reassigned. My clearance revoked. The lab shut down, and I was told to forget everything. There was a short entry after that. Just one sentence. So I moved everything here. Mae leaned back against the cold concrete wall. The journal felt heavier now. Her hands traced the frayed spine, the ink-smudged margins, the fingerprints of a man who had been silenced by his own country. She tried to picture him. Sergeant Elias Mercado, the man her mother refused to talk about. The man who had apparently spent the final years of his life hiding beneath an abandoned warehouse, not to vanish, but to protect something. And now, that something was in her hands. She looked around the bunker again, the soft hum of silence, the dormant engine waiting, the sealed crates stacked like forgotten promises. Everything about the place whispered purpose. But the biggest question remained. Why her? Why did he write her name? Why now? The envelope still waited in her pocket, and in the back of her mind, a thought returned again and again, like a heartbeat she couldn't ignore. This wasn't just a discovery, it was a responsibility. Mae waited until the third night to finally bring it up. She sat across the kitchen table from her mother, a mug of untouched tea growing cold between her palms. The warehouse key lay in her pocket. The envelope, too. But it was the name that finally pushed her. Did Grandpa ever work for the government? She asked carefully. Her mother stiffened, just enough to notice. No, she said flatly. Why? Mae didn't answer right away. She waited. Her mother reached for her cup, but didn't drink. Her fingers curled around the handle with the kind of tension that betrayed an old wound. I found something, Mae said gently. Something under the warehouse. Her mother looked up then, her eyes narrowing. What kind of something? A bunker, Mae said. Blueprints, notes, a journal, signed by Elias Mercado. Her mother didn't speak. She didn't move. For a long, cold stretch of time, she simply stared at her daughter like the breath had been knocked from her. Then she pushed back from the table and stood up. You were never supposed to find that, she said quietly, more to herself than to Mae. Mae followed her into the living room, questions tumbling over each other in her throat. Why didn't you ever tell us? That he was in the military? That he built something? That he disappeared? Her mother stopped in front of a faded photo on the wall, a young boy on a tricycle, her brother, Nico, probably 2 years old. She reached out and straightened the frame. Then she said, Because I thought I had buried him for good. Mae said nothing. Her mother sat down on the edge of the couch, her shoulders sagging. Your grandfather was brilliant, she began. But he didn't belong to the world. He belonged to a war no one ever talks about. The kind where scientists build things they're not allowed to understand. She paused, hands in her lap. He tried to walk away from it, said he couldn't stomach what they were turning it into. But walking away from that kind of work, it costs you everything. Mae sat down beside her. So they made him disappear? Her mother shook her head. No, he disappeared himself. I begged him to stay. For me. For the family. He said he had to finish something, and then he was gone. One letter. No address. No calls. I thought he was dead. Mae pulled the envelope from her jacket and placed it gently in her mother's hands. He left this. For me. Her mother stared at it. Her fingers trembled as she traced the handwriting, the shape of her father's letters after so many years. He must have known someday you'd go looking, she whispered. Mae swallowed hard. He didn't just leave a letter. He left a machine. Blueprints. A design that doesn't look like anything I've seen before. Her mother looked at her finally, eyes glassy. Then maybe he left you the part of himself he couldn't give anyone else. And in the quiet that followed, Mae understood. She wasn't just fixing something buried. She was resurrecting something lost. Back in the bunker, the dust didn't feel quite so heavy anymore. Mae moved with purpose now, not just curiosity. Each time she descended the ladder, flashlight tucked in one hand, journal in the other, she felt a little closer to him, to Elias Mercado, the man who once disappeared into silence and steel. And somehow, she no longer felt alone in this space. It was like the air itself was beginning to trust her. The envelope had held more than just a letter. Inside were diagrams, folded tightly, brittle along the creases, but beautifully intact. A complete schematic of the engine she'd found on the raised platform. Except this version was finished labeled in his precise handwriting, every part numbered, every connection mapped out. The title at the top, Clean Pulse Energy Engine, Reverend 4 Final Draft. She'd stared at that phrase for almost an hour, not because she didn't understand it, but because she did. If what he had designed really worked, this wasn't just a passion project. It was revolutionary. Nico sat across from her on the floor, sorting through a crate of old components. Some of these parts aren't even standard issue, he said, holding up a copper coil wrapped in etched titanium. Where the hell did he get this stuff? Mae smiled faintly. He probably built it himself, or borrowed it from the future, but not everything was there. Some parts had corroded beyond use. Others were missing altogether. The hardest to replicate were the custom-formed alloy pieces, high precision, zero tolerance, and Mae didn't have the tools for that kind of work. Yet, she unrolled the blueprints again, laid them flat on a cleared workbench in the corner of the bunker. Every detail was deliberate. Modular battery units arranged in an overlapping spiral. Cooling fins designed for silent dissipation. A magnetic resonance chamber at the core, a design she'd never seen in any automotive manual, but somehow made perfect sense. It was engineering born from experience, not theory. Practical, intuitive, impossible, and yet real. This isn't just a machine, Mae said quietly. It's a message. Nico looked up. From him? Mae nodded. From the man they erased. He wanted someone to finish what he started. But not for the military, for something better. Over the next few days, the warehouse transformed. The bunker became her second shop, and the main floor above it turned into a staging area. She brought in a plasma cutter. She sourced rare alloys from scrapyards and specialty shops. She called in favors from old friends who owed her jobs, work, or at the very least, silence. She didn't post anything online. Not yet. This wasn't a project for the world. Not yet. This was about redemption for a man who'd given up everything to protect an idea, for a daughter who never got to say goodbye, and for a mechanic girl who never imagined she'd inherit more than grease-stained dreams. Mae bent over the schematic and started drawing up her own notes. The rebuild had begun. The first time the welding torch sparked to life in the warehouse, Mae felt it deep in her chest. Not like fear, more like ignition. The kind that happens just before a storm hits, or when a long-forgotten memory finally resurfaces. It was the sound of something beginning, something sacred. She worked late, long past when the streetlights flickered on and the nearby rail yard went silent. Nico was usually there, cutting parts, cataloging components, taking apart salvage finds, and machining them into shapes that matched their grandfather's blueprints. It wasn't perfect. Most days, it wasn't even close. They burned through drill bits, misaligned bearings, fought rust that clung to the old steel like it had been forged in grief. But slowly, it came together. The prototype engine sat at the center of the warehouse now, bolted to a reinforced frame on loan from a local mechanic who didn't ask questions when Mae paid in cash and avoided eye contact. Word had gotten out not about the bunker or the invention, but about the girl rebuilding something big. She didn't tell anyone the full truth, just that it was her grandfather's last project, and that it deserved to be finished. One by one, people started showing up. First, it was Mr. DeWitt from the old machine shop on 6th Street, retired, but curious. He brought his lathe skills and a steady hand. Then a woman named Frankie, former Army Corps engineer, who'd worked with Elias back in the 72nds and thought he'd died overseas. She showed up unannounced, walked into the warehouse, saw the blueprints, and wept without saying a word. After that, she stayed. Mae didn't ask how she'd heard. She was just grateful someone else believed. Every day brought new challenges: a coil too brittle, a circuit board fried from age, a support bracket bent beyond reuse. But Mae was relentless. Every failure was followed by a dozen adjustments. Every setback became a lesson. Her hands, once used to turning wrenches on brake jobs and blown head gaskets, now worked with precision on magnetic resonators and hybrid cooling arrays. She kept the journal open beside her most nights. Elias's words in the margins, his calculations scribbled between lines like whispers from the past. "Trust your instincts," one note read. "This engine runs on more than power. It runs on belief." Mae copied that one onto the wall above the workbench in thick black marker. It became a mantra. On hard days, she'd read it aloud. On impossible ones, she'd say it under her breath between welds. She didn't know if the engine would run, but she knew this. Every part she touched, every bolt she tightened, every blueprint she traced, it was all part of a conversation, one that had been interrupted for 50 years, one she was finally helping to finish. And in that warehouse full of rust and rivets, resolve became the strongest metal of all. He arrived just after sunset. The warehouse lights were still on, humming softly above Mae and Frankie as they aligned the final housing ring into place. The engine, now nearly whole, sat beneath the glow like something reborn, no longer a puzzle, but a presence. Mae was wiping grease from her fingers when she saw the figure at the door. He didn't knock, just stood there in the threshold, hands in the pockets of a dark overcoat, his posture precise. Military, Mae thought immediately. Even before he spoke. "You're Mae Alvarez?" She nodded slowly. "Can I help you?" He stepped forward, boots echoing on the concrete. His face was calm, unreadable. Late 40s maybe, close-cropped hair, clean-shaven. "My name is Richard Lane," he said. "I work with the Department of Energy, specifically in legacy containment and classified decommission." Frankie went still. Mae glanced at her, then back at Lane. "Containment?" she repeated. Lane nodded toward the engine. "You've been working on something that was never supposed to resurface." Mae folded her arms. "My grandfather built this, and buried it." "He did," Lane agreed, "because he knew what it could do, and he knew what others would do with it." Frankie stepped forward now, eyes sharp. "Don't lecture us on ethics. We were there. We saw what they twisted his designs into." Lane didn't flinch. "And we're trying to prevent that from happening again." Mae tilted her head. "By what, shutting this down? Taking it? Making it disappear like you made him disappear?" Lane looked at her, and for the first time, his voice softened. "Mae, I read the journal. I've seen the blueprints, and I believe your grandfather meant this for good. I do. But it's too advanced. Too open to misuse. Once it's out there, we can't control how it's replicated." "That's not your decision anymore," Mae said. "He trusted me with it. Not you." Lane sighed, stepped closer. "I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here to warn you. The moment this thing activates, even once, signals will spike. People will notice. Not just us, and some of them won't ask so nicely." Mae glanced at the engine. The coil chamber shimmered under the light. It wasn't just machinery, it was proof. Of genius, of sacrifice, of belief. "So what would you have me do?" she asked quietly. "Take it apart. Seal it up. Let it die with dignity." "No." The word left her lips before she could question it. "No," she repeated. "He didn't bury this to keep it hidden. He buried it to protect it until someone came along who wouldn't be scared." Lane looked at her for a long moment, then finally nodded once. Not in agreement, but in understanding. "I hope you know what you're doing," he said, turning for the door. "I do," Mae replied. He paused before stepping out into the night. "Then, make sure you finish it." And with that, he was gone. But his warning lingered, and Mae knew the next steps had to be perfect. Because now, everyone was watching. It started with a soft hum, low, almost imperceptible, like a whisper coming alive beneath metal and breath. Mae stood over the engine, hand hovering near the activation switch, Nico beside her, Frankie watching silently from the wall. The others had cleared out hours ago, their part finished, their faith handed over to her like a sacred tool. This final moment was hers alone. She exhaled, then pressed the switch. For a few terrifying seconds, nothing happened. Mae's heart stuttered. She thought of the years Elias had spent building this in silence, the risks, the secrecy, the war between innovation and fear. And then it happened. A pulse. The coil chamber lit up. A slow swirl of blue and gold energy rippling through the magnetic housing. The machine didn't roar. It breathed, smooth, controlled, silent. Like it had been waiting decades for someone to believe in it again. Mae staggered back slightly, breath catching in her throat. "It's running," Nico whispered. "No fuel," Frankie murmured, awe in her voice. "No emissions. It's real. It's actually real." Mae felt tears sting behind her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She stepped closer again, watching as the core stabilized, its temperature holding steady, its hum deepening, not mechanical, but organic, alive. This was not a machine built for war. This was a gift. The next morning, Mae walked alone into the bunker with the framed photo of her grandfather Elias, young and proud, standing beside the unfinished engine he never got to complete. She placed it on the control console, right next to the switch. "You were right to wait," she said softly. She didn't tell anyone outside her team. Not yet. She knew Lane's warning wasn't just talk. If the wrong people found out, it could be taken, twisted, buried again, this time without mercy. But she also knew something deeper now. This wasn't about hiding. It was about timing. Over the weeks that followed, Mae refined the engine, improving the wiring, cleaning the housing, writing her own notes in the margins of Elias's blueprints. She even started a new journal, not just for herself, but for whoever came after. Because something this important shouldn't belong to one person. It should echo forward, passed on. She kept the bunker sealed when she wasn't working. On the outside, the warehouse looked like any other old building, faded paint, crooked gutters, the illusion of silence. But inside, something new was taking shape. She called it the Legacy Engine. One night, just before closing, Mae sat alone in the darkened shop, the bunker hatch sealed beneath her feet, the engine asleep below. She looked around at the walls, the tools, the faint echo of everything she had built and rebuilt in the last year. She used to be a girl just trying to keep her shop alive. Now she was the keeper of a future someone tried to erase. And somewhere deep inside, beneath bolts and blueprints, a new kind of fire had been lit. Not one that destroys, one that illuminates.